and welcome everybody. I'm Sally Warhaft. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening, wherever you are. We're joining you from Melbourne, and tonight's conversation is hosted by Plus61J Media. It's a news and opinion website covering Australia, Israel and the Jewish world, and you can find them at the website plus61j.com.au. And we're here to celebrate the latest work of writer and documentary maker, satirist and broadcaster John Safran. And John has written now numerous books, including Murder in Mississippi and Depends What You Mean by Extremist. And his latest book, which is what we'll be talking about this evening, Puff Peace. How Philip Morris set vaping alight and burned down the English language. Of course, you've seen him on the telly as well, but he's right here on the screen. Hello, John. Welcome.
Shalom. How are you? I especially have tailored that for the night. Shalom.
Shalom. And shalom.
When I'm doing Gentile media, I don't do shalom.
What do you do?
G'day. G'day. I try to, just blend in with society. That's why I'm called John, by the way. My parents were like, we're not in Eastern Europe anymore. Let's give him a nice name, John. That will make him just blend in.
It's why I'm called Sally.
And cut to 3 decades later, and, I'm dancing footloose at Yeshiva College and streaking through Jerusalem. And yes, it didn't work. This whole thing of just blend in, John, and we'll call you John so you don't seem so Jewish. Just did not work at all.
No, you've been spotted. Well, you're here in Melbourne after a week of riots and an earthquake and a deadly infectious disease running rife in the community, but still we can meet on a Sunday night for a chat about the biggest killer of them all, and that is big tobacco. And I just want to start by asking about the appeal. You're sort of getting a real collection now of horror topics under your belt. So tell us about what drew you to this.
Each year there's a World No Tobacco Day put on by the United Nations because they're against cancer. And a couple of World No Tobacco Days ago, I was reading the newspaper, just minding my own business, and there was a full-page ad from Philip Morris, the Marlboro people, saying, in light of, to celebrate or whatever, World No Tobacco, we're announcing that we're shutting down as a cigarette company and relaunching as a health enterprise dedicated to bringing the 1 billion smokers of the world, including, their own customers, off cigarettes. I was like, wow, it just seemed like it seemed like that's kind of a big deal. And I was thinking, is this true? I guess it could be because, there was like the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of apartheid. There's like stranger things happen. and so I was like, is this real? And then I was just curious. And so I poked around a bit and I soon found out that you can't take the makers of Marlboro cigarettes on face value all the time. Sometimes, maybe. And I just became I was intrigued by this gambit that they were doing because it seemed so consequential because cigarettes remain the biggest killer. Like 52 million people die of everything each year and 8 million are cigarette related still. And so I was curious about that. And then I was also just curious why no one else seemed to be curious. It is like, and because they've just pulled off the biggest, what do you call it? Not gambit. It's kind of amazing. It was like the beginning of the end for Philip Morris because in Europe, they banned last year all menthol cigarettes so you can't produce them, can't sell them, with an eye to banning all cigarettes across Europe. So this was like the end of it all for Philip Morris, the beginning of the end. And then they just came up with this ingenious gambit and it worked. And I was just so surprised it wasn't being covered. I was like, this could have been the fall of the Berlin Wall of lung cancer. but instead it's going to continue on. And there's no books about it, articles or tweets even. So that I became curious about that too.
Well, we will obviously get right into that, but just to sort of get a sense of you in this too, I wonder about your experience of addiction in entering a sort of story like this. In the book, it's certainly, you don't seem to have ever been drawn to cigarettes. Perhaps you're a secret gambler or attend a 12-step program for some other curious addiction, but
version, yes.
I wonder how well you feel you understand addiction, or certainly how well you think you understand it compared to, say, Philip Morris, because it's such a big part of understanding how they operate.
Oh yeah, for sure. But that's why when I started digging into the story, I realized what my connective point to it was about language and storytelling and words, because you hear things that it even sounds a bit banal or just like, or a bit twee or something, saying that, like talking about the power of words. But in this case, Philip Morris really just started rewording things, and it's got the most incredible consequence, like the most high stakes word game of out there. And so that's when I started realizing that, like, I like telling stories, I like using words, and I can see the power of language, and I can see how you frame things and you say things. And I realized, like, Philip Morris, this was their game, this was their gambit, this was their technique. And that's where I felt I had skin in the game and I felt like I could bring something to the table, because as soon as I realized Philip Morris were playing the most high stakes word game imaginable. Do you want to have a look at this?
Oh, that's
the thing. So what happens?
That's what happens is named thing.
The heat stick. So Philip Morris, when they realized they can't sell menthol cigarettes across Europe last year, they said, okay, no good, we won't sell menthol cigarettes anymore. And then they said, oh, by the way, while we've got your attention, we have this new product, and God knows it's not a cigarette, it's a menthol heat stick. But like,
it really does look like a cigarette, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like tobacco rolled in paper with a filter at one end that you plant between your lips, inhaling nicotine and tobacco into your lungs, and then exhaling this thing that kind of looks quite a bit like smoke and has smoke toxicants in it. But they go, it's not a cigarette, it's a heat stick. And all these wise lawmakers in Europe who'd been working on this legislation for years just did not factor in what happens if Philip Morris just have the gumption to say, have the gall, the guts to kind of like just put this out and just say, oh no, it's not a cigarette, it's a heat stick. And it worked. You can buy heat sticks all across Europe now, menthol heat sticks, even though menthol cigarettes are all banned.
Now,
and then that was, yeah.
I was just going to say that goes into another contraption, doesn't
it?
It's not as elegant as the thing you've just held up. Have you got the...
Yeah, I do have the thing. So it's not only words, it's like using words for misdirection. I realized Philip Morris are just masters of misdirection. And the problem with misdirection, like if you're watching it, you don't know what you aren't looking at. So this is what you slide the heat stick into. It's like a thing that looks like a cool astronaut's pen. And you go like that, and this heats it up. So instead of lighting it on fire, this heats it up. And so the first misdirection is that I had to get my head around, and I've just cut to the chase here, is Philip Morris don't talk about this at all. They talk about this, which is like the charger and the heat stick that you stick it in. So they're saying, oh, we've got this new thing, it's this. And then they sort of just kind of cough this out of the way. They kind of go, anyway, so this heats it up and it's got a light and it doesn't generate smoke because it doesn't combust, blah, 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 blah. And then they sort of like, they kind of like, and you just slide this like tobacco unit into, and they don't want you to look at this because as soon as you look at this, you go, hang on, isn't that just a cigarette? So, and they're so brilliant at this. Like, for instance, I was on the ABC the other night on the drum, and they did a little package together at the start of what this is. And their thing was like, obviously, ABC is not pro Philip Morris or anything like that. But because Philip Morris had like set up this misdirection and this argument that this is what it's about, that's what the package on the ABC was all about. Was about, oh, there's this new device, that Philip Morris introduced. So that's how brilliant they are at it. That like even something like the ABC that clearly isn't going into bat for Philip Morris, well, just because of this misdirection, and there's so much misdirection, this is only the first bit, they managed to sort of get caught up in it.
My own history is that I'm a former smoker. I'm the kid that at as a teenager stole one of my dad's Camel filterless cigarettes.
Yum.
Yeah, took it to the swing after dinner. This wasn't about being around friends, something cool, or I just wanted to try what my parents seemed to enjoy so much. And I lit it up and smoked it on my own and loved it. And there began, a really big problem for me that lasted a long, long time. In fact, until I had children. And I tried everything. I'm sure you've spoken and heard from countless former smokers like me. Hypnosis, cold turkey, patches, gum. And the thing that finally worked for me was this, which is a vape.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's quite different to the thing that you were holding on to. I want you to tell me, first of all, what the difference is.
Yeah.
But second of all, whether or not you think both can fit into a harm minimization model for people who just want to stop smoking, and that anything is going to be better than smoking actual proven named cigarettes.
Yeah. So the second part of, or another layer to the misdirection is Philip Morris implies that this is a vape or isn't a vape, depending on whether it's convenient at any moment for this to be a vape or for this not to be a vape. And the reason they can do that is because a vape you plug into the wall. So you could say, oh, that's an e-cigarette, an electronic cigarette, electricity goes through it. And this charger you plug into the wall. So it's an e-cigarette. It can be an e-cigarette too. So, and then, but there's a significant difference between a vape and the heat stick, which is that in a cigarette, cigarettes have tobacco leaf. Tobacco leaf generates tar, and tar is what kills you in a cigarette. Whilst in a vape, it's heating up steam, or it's steaming up this liquid, and that liquid contains like nicotine, propylene glycerol, contains flavorings, but it doesn't actually contain tobacco leaf, a vape. So therefore, vapors can say, and it's true, that and because it doesn't contain tobacco leaf, it doesn't generate tar. So therefore, people who vape can say that the thing that kills you in a cigarette, tar, isn't in a vape. But
when you say people, you mean there is scientific evidence, of course.
Yeah, but then the matter becomes, but are there other problems? Like, will there be other respiratory problems, that even dire ones, not related to tar, that could screw you up with vaping, right? So there's that. Okay, but then this is why this shenanigan here with Philip Morris is so ingenious, is that this does contain tobacco leaf, so does generate tar, which you're inhaling. So the most deadly thing in a cigarette is in this thing, which they claim isn't a cigarette. And so that's where it gets really tricky. And Philip Morris starts playing their little misdirection word games again. Like, for instance, the whilst there's not a lot of government support around the world by official organizations for vaping, there's this one endorsement that's pretty powerful, which is by the UK government's National Health Service. And they've
like
said
our
that,
AMA, right?
yeah. So they've said that vaping can be a tool for getting yourself off smoking, right? So then when the National Health Service made that announcement, Philip Morris was saying, they were bragging, like on Twitter going, well, the National Health Service endorses like e-cigarettes, and they see that we need to go to this future with new products, where it's sort of like really insinuated that like you're reading it and you're going, well, that must be about this because that's Philip Morris's device. But then I read when you dig into the fine print of the National Health Service statement, they say, yes, we endorse e-cigarettes for helping wean people off smoking. But let us make clear, when we say e-cigarettes, we mean vapes, and we absolutely do not mean these devices, because for the reason I explained before, it goes, they contain tobacco, and therefore it's too much like a cigarette or a cigarette. And so Philip Morris, on the one hand, sort of imply that, if there's good news around vaping, they soak it up and they suck it up. But then on the other hand, hilariously, when there's bad news about vaping, so in America, kids were ending up in hospital and some were even dying because they were smoking black market vape juice. So that was
with cannabis, wasn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of the agents that's in an agent in cannabis. So these kind of tainted black market vape capsules. So then when that happened, and that was like hitting the news and everyone was getting worried about vaping, then Philip Morris came out and they're like, oh, no. Can we just make clear? Can we make clear that this isn't a vape? And so all that news you're hearing about, bad news about vape, that's about that. And God knows it's not about this. So again, like Philip Morris playing word games and misdirection and making their thing an e-cigarette or not an e-cigarette, depending on what's the most harmful, to their business. But when you say about, so is vaping, because my book's more about how Philip Morris exploit everything, including the world of vaping, rather than it really, I mean, you've read the book, so it's not like directly about like vaping in and of itself. Like it's not really pro-vaping or anti-vaping or whatever. But having said that, because I was like researching it for a while, like you start picking up things and talking to doctors and everything. So I think the tricky thing about vaping is that if someone was to vape for like 6 months or a year or something like that, weaning themselves off cigarettes, like they're already a smoker and then they wean themselves off cigarettes with vaping. And then at the end of the year, they put the cigarettes to one side, but also the vape to one side. Then you can see that it's like, you can understand why people say, oh, it's a tool like for health.
I never had a puff on a cigarette again from the
Yeah,
day.
but then the issue becomes that if you're huffing on this thing for the next 10 years, is it going to cause other respiratory problems, including dire ones, because you're just not meant to have that stuff in your system? Like, a bit like, you can put up with a bit of pollution for a while, or you can put up with hanging out in a smoke machine for a while. But if you're like doing it for 10 years straight, are you just going to get another form of, another form of dire respiratory consequences? So that's where it becomes tricky about having a ruling on vaping. And then, of course, the other thing with vaping is that it's like, because it's relatively new, like not all the research has been done yet. But basically, Philip Morris were moving into vaping, I wouldn't have a book. But my book is like really centers around this whole thing of like, I cannot believe they've got this, all they've said is this isn't a cigarette, and it's worked, and they've saved the day.
It's interesting that they've done it. I mean, that was one of the things, that I was left with in the book was, and I'd never heard of this product before I read your book. It is the worst named product.
ICOS and Heat Stick.
IQOS heat stick. I mean, it just couldn't. I mean, compared to cigarette,
So
as just a word, but I mean, it certainly doesn't seem. I mean, I keep a look. I'm interested in the whole.
they're forbidden in Australia. Like
Yeah.
so, and also like with vaping, it's pretty easy for like mom and pop businesses to set up and manufacture vape juice or whatever, whilst this really has to come from Philip Morris or a really or a big counterfeit firm in China or something like that. So yeah, but at the moment these are forbidden in Australia. So because I'm such a badass, I managed to buy one out the back of a truck in a car park in Doncaster. So that's why I've got one. So if the cops raid during this interview and drag me away because I've got
You'd be getting a fine first of all for being outside of your 5K or 10K radius, just for starters.
Oh no, I got that beforehand. I got that beforehand.
I'm interested. I mean, they launch it. You find in your Google research some secret internal documents just lying there on the internet, comparing the launch of this product to the great social movements of the 20th century.
Totally. Yeah, because go on, sorry.
And I just that and the why they decided to not go into direct competition with a vape. I'm really curious. I mean, there's a lot of investment in vape companies, which they pretend they don't have. What did you discover, if anything, about their insistence on making this product with tobacco? Was that about keeping good with their producers, or?
Well, I think so. I think a big thing is with tobacco, they've got a unique selling proposition that they can tell their shareholders, for instance. So they can say to their shareholders, and that's also another thing I learned about storytelling whilst researching this, is so much is them not only having a story for customers or potential customers, and it's for shareholders. So I bought shares in Philip Morris International because I have no ethics, despite the fact that my book is #1 under business ethics on Amazon. I don't have it. So I bought shares in Philip Morris so I could start attending their financial conference calls. And I just realized, like, a conference call is like telling a story, and they're telling their investors, like, we've got a plan. Like you can see it, we can see it. Cigarettes are falling out of favor in a lot of places, and there's even like they're getting banned across Europe. So this is like they have a story. They're like, oh, we've got a plan for what's going to happen in the future. And this doesn't even have to sell that well immediately, because it's more about having the story about what's going to happen once cigarettes kind of totally fall out of favor. And then so there's that. And this they can say to investors going, oh, listen, anyone can make vape juice in their garage, but we're the tobacco people. And so that's I think that's the big reason they're sticking with tobacco. And that's also, which is also like when I was attending their shareholder or their financial conference calls, I did realize just how much I live in a bubble, or I guess we all live in bubbles, where like when you're in the arts, everything's about, oh my God, I've got to look good. The worst thing that could happen is someone's dissing me on Twitter, or someone's going to attack me for something on social media. Like, I should plan my whole life around not that happening to me. Whilst if you're like Philip Morris, the worst thing that can happen is you're at the financial calls, and you don't have a story to tell about how things are looking up, things are looking good. So you can really put up with being called a murderer and having jerks like me write books about you, because, like, who cares? Like, because them having to be on a financial call and tell the investors that sales are down or they don't have a plan, like that's the canceling they care about. They don't care about John Safran writing his sarcastic book, or maybe they do actually.
I reckon they'd be well aware of it. And
oh yeah, no, I haven't. Yeah,
I'm sure they're watching now. John, do you have something to say to them?
No, I can't figure out whether. So there'd be like two sides to it. One is obviously really I've been quite annoying because I've got to tell the ICOS story and the heat stick story before they have. So it really, and I talk about this in the book about how I'm launching the ICOS and the heat stick in Australia because like 99.999 they haven't heard about, and the first time they're going to hear about it is me blathering on the drum or me blathering on Q&A or reading my book or listening to my audio book or whatever. So it is kind of funny. Like I am launching the ICOS. I have launched the ICOS in Australia, and obviously not in the way that they want. But on the other hand, they do have a strategy that's a bit similar to the what do you call them? The creationists, the evangelical Christians in America, and they wanted to teach creationism in the science room, and the science teachers were going, "We're not going to teach creationism in the science room because it doesn't have like scientific validity like the Big Bang Theory does." And they said, "Oh no, you understand your position? Like no, but teach the controversy, and because so therefore." When you can't get platformed any other way and everyone hates you, like you come up with this little neat bit of rhetoric where it's like teach the controversy, and then so they're hoping that like in science classrooms or whatever, even if creationism's taught as not being valid, or at least it's something, at least the kids are going to hear about it some way. So because cigarette companies are totally deplatformed by everyone except for me, like there is like some benefit, I guess, that like probably I imagine if you look at Google algorithms or whatever of like there's been a spike in Australia of people typing in heat stick and ICOS, because of my book. So there's some level where maybe they like that. I hope so. I hope that they're thinking of like they keep that in mind if they're thinking of like taking me out or whatever. Just think I've got, and there are like funny things like that you're not allowed to like show. Well, first of all, I was like wearing all this Philip Morris merch like for photo shoots because I found all this cool stuff like old Melbro, like Formula One stuff, and then I wasn't allowed to wear that because so my first controversy since the book was released wasn't about being against Philip Morris. It was that I was promoting Philip Morris through my clothes in my photo shoots, and so the Age couldn't run any of the photos or anything. So then I was like, okay, fine. Because it just seemed fun to be posing in Melbro gear because you're just not meant to or something.
I mean, you think about the ways that Philip Morris can spin things.
Yes.
Spinning you would be a cup of tea.
Oh, yeah. But there's like the best photos. Like the Guardian took photos of me. And so I'm like with the heat stick and I'm demonstrating it. And there's just these like cool looking photos in the Guardian, in the left-wing Guardian with me, the anti-Philip Morris guy. And I'm like, and they're really like nice shots. They even make me look like, not some crooked nose kind of gangly pasty man, but like some sort of like, sophisticated person or whatever. Yeah. So Philip Morris, keep that in mind. Think of how I've put your ICOS and heat stick into the Australian domain. And so don't have me killed.
If anything happens to you, I promise I'll investigate.
Yes,
immediately.
It will. It'll be a good true crime podcast.
At the moment, you'd have to go through a fair few major things like, killer infectious virus, anti-Semites on the streets of Melbourne, earthquakes. But I think, Philip Morris might come in fourth. Let's talk a bit about the language part. A bit more about that. I wonder when I was reading it if you'd ever read a book called Cigarettes Are Sublime by Richard
Klein. By what's his name? Yeah, Richard totally.
Klein. Richard
Klein. Yeah, no, I really love that book.
It's a beautiful book, isn't it?
Yeah, because the idea behind that book is he's addicted to cigarettes and he thinks he has to acknowledge the beauty of cigarettes and what he enjoys about cigarettes to then kind of make the decision that no, but despite that, I'm not going to smoke them or whatever. So I read that. I also read, God, what's it called? Do you know that other one? He mentions it in that book. There's this other one, this Italian one. Is it Zeno's? It's like Zeno's Complaint or something like that. And it's this Italian book written yonks ago. And the whole book is this dude. It's fiction, I think, but I don't know how much it's based on the author's own life or whatever. Like him trying to give up his last cigarette. And
yes.
Maybe it's called Zeno, something like that. Complaint or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I did read those two books. Usually I don't, when I'm kind of getting in the groove to write, it's not always like I literally read books that are like the same topic or whatever. It's usually I just like reading books that have this sort of like energy. Like I love reading old American pulp kind of crime novels, like where there's a bedraggled criminal or a bedraggled con artist or bedraggled kind of cop or something it's his last chance, and he's an alcoholic and he's sleeping on couches. And I love reading those because they're so sort of like punchy and just the language just, and they're cascading and whatever. Like, so I usually like to read those rather than like books on facts about the topic that I'm about to address. But in the case of this book, yeah, Cigarettes Are Sublime. I read that, and what I took from that was that, like, this book's got a lot more, not essaying, but I kind of really say what's in my head, and I'm quite literal about it. Like, there's so much less reading between the lines in this book compared with my other books, and so that's what I kind of learned from Cigarettes Is Sublime, and this is a complicated topic, and I'm really going to hold the reader's hands along the way. And then, like, the really cool thing was when I started writing this and researching it, I realized I didn't know anything about like science, but it was kind of fun. Like, you could say that, like, people aren't going to go, you're an idiot, John, why don't you know about the science of combustion? You know, like, people aren't going to say that. They're going to say, oh, well, it's totally reasonable that even though you're an adult, you don't know about that. So I got to kind of like learn about science, and then like the reader learns along the way, and what I learned. And that's why I was like, I learned this from my first book, because I kind of screwed up my first book. Well, not screwed it up, but what I really learned about the first book, it's like, always record, like when you're starting a project, at least my stuff, record what you're thinking at every stage, because once you learn something, it's hard to go back and write and pretend you don't know it. And so this book, like, it travels, and I slowly learn a bit more and whatever. And that's totally based on my notes, where I was like, I literally didn't, like, I was thinking when I started learning, like, the first thing I learned, Philip Morris, where they say, well, the IQOS doesn't combust. And then I'm just thinking, I don't know what combustion is. Like if someone said in the next 30 seconds, like, it's one of those things I think I know, but then it's like, really, if I was to be honest, I'd be going, the most I know about combustion is about how the drummers in Spinal Tap all combusted. But anyway, so then I just like record, like, I don't know about combustion. If I was forced to define combustion in the next 30 seconds, or my dad combusts, he's combusting, because I don't actually know it. And so, yes, I just kept on making notes and notes of gradually learning along the way. And then when I went to write it, I just sort of figured out kind of like funny ways to sort of convey that.
Cigarettes Are Sublime is an old book, like, and I pulled it out just because you'd got me thinking about it, and I didn't reread the whole book, but I dipped in with great joy. And I remembered that one of the things about that book, and I think it's what your book why it made me think of it, that what he's really asking, and in some ways what you're asking in different ways, is, what is a cigarette? And,
that's it.
Yeah. He's coming at it in a very sort of philosophical and cultural and historical way, and you're coming at it out of this sort of puff of absolute confusion that Philip Morris have put you in, as to, I mean, the detail that you go into about, what is smoke.
Yeah.
And tar. I'm trying to remember. They rename tar in the stick as, what is it?
Nicotine-free dry particulate matter. And there's just so much misdirection going on. Like, and they're so brilliant at it. Like, so for instance, their whole thing is that because this heats it to an incredible degree, the heat stick, this device, unlike a cigarette lighter, but it never actually catches a light. They say it doesn't combust. Therefore, because it doesn't combust, so it doesn't catch fire, so it doesn't combust. And combustion is what generates smoke, and smoking is what kills you in a cigarette. And so they're saying this doesn't combust, so it's not generating smoke. So the most deadly thing in a cigarette isn't in this that you're inhaling. So, and I can't tell you, I mean, there's like 5 different misdirections in that are just like jaw dropping once you kind of once I figured them out. And it was so, they're so good at it that I was figuring out things. One of the major things in my book, like, wasn't in my second draft that I gave to Penguin. It was like, I'm driving my car, like after I've handed in the second draft, and I'm like, oh my God, what about that? Or whatever. So, so they start this whole thing of, well, and a lot of the books about this, they're claiming that the discharge from this, even though it kind of looks like smoke, and I find out in their papers that they do admit there's some smoke toxicants in it. They're saying, oh, there's not enough smoke toxicants in this thing that's coming out of this cigarette looking thing, that to call it smoke, even though it has smoke toxicants in it. So they're like insisting it's not smoke, even though this thing that looks incredibly like smoke, that's coming out of this thing that looks incredibly like a cigarette, they're saying it's not smoke. And therefore, you know, when you're inhaling it, you're not inhaling smoke. But then I realized that when they say the thing that kills you in a cigarette is smoke, or the most dangerous thing in a cigarette is smoke, that's both true, but also like this wild misdirection, because the truth actually is what kills you in a cigarette is the tar in the smoke. So therefore, like, I just have this, like, this, like, I've handed in the second draft already, and I'm driving, I'm just going, hang on. So the question isn't really, does this generate smoke? The question is, does this generate tar? And again, you have to dig, you know, you're actually in tar, trying to get out, fight your way out of it, because I've changed the word to tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. So therefore, when you're like looking up the ingredients in this new heat stick, there's no tar in it. And it's just because they've changed the word tar to something else. And they've been so clever about it that I read this medical paper, like in a science journal, where they're like against Philip Morris. They're trying to say this is total, you know, you're being tricked, don't do it or whatever. But even they got duped by this sort of like little word switcheroo, change the word tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. And they're so clever with these little word games that there's even one that's not in the book, because the book was already pressed, was already kind of off the printing presses. And I realized they duped me one more way. Like, oh, there was like another layer to their language game, which is actually brilliant, is that not only do they have the audacity to, so the deadly thing in a cigarette is tar, so they introduce a new product. So their solution is not to get rid of the tar, but to get rid of the word tar to nicotine-free dry particulate matter. So as if that's not far enough in their audaciousness, I was going, oh my God, they've renamed tar in a very specific way. They've used the expression nicotine-free dry particulate matter. So nicotine-free, right? They don't deny there's nicotine in this. So what they've taken the most infamous nicotine product in the world, and this has got nicotine. Then they've isolated the bit of the most infamous nicotine product in the world that doesn't have nicotine and labeled that bit nicotine-free. So now when they get to promote this, they can say the words nicotine-free stamped on the most infamous nicotine product in the world. And so they're just brilliant. However much they're getting paid, their executives, it's not enough, because
all that said and done, though,
yes,
Philip Morris and Big Tobacco, I mean, no one other than you would be buying shares in them. They are desperately trying to reinvent themselves in often laughable ways and often evil ways still as well. But there's a really terrific section of the book where you write about, how long do you have to wait for a really evil company to kind of be acceptable again? Like, how long did, we have to wait to drive a Mercedes or a VW? And there's a beautiful interview with your father, actually, that he comes across as a very intelligent and thoughtful and forgiving person.
He's the tree that the apple fell very far from.
I was just about to say, as you are too, and you clearly are. But what does an evil company simply have to go away? Is there any way that you think that it could redeem? It could never redeem itself, but to pivot itself in a way that it could use its intelligence to support harm minimization?
Yeah, like in my book, I'm totally a hype man for Philip Morris in that, like, for instance, I talk about how they're developing or have developed a COVID vaccine, believe it or not. And unlike his heat stick, that's not like a scam or anything. They invested in they're owners of a biotech company, or co-owners, a Canadian one. And they look into how to use tobacco plants and tobacco-related plants and how to use them in vaccines and this is like really getting almost above my head or whatever. Like, apparently, usually they use like egg yolks in vaccines, but they've figured out a way to
put tobacco in
a nicotine. Well, it's not tobacco.
Stop. You're going to start something really bad here.
No, it's not tobacco. It's a nicotine related. It's a nicotine related plant, but it's totally legit because the Canadian government has invested in it, and they've come up with a COVID vaccine, but I think they're still doing their research on it. And I was so excited. I was really hoping they would have had it together and I could get the Philip Morris COVID vaccine.
Oh, there's always time for boosters.
Boosters, maybe I had to go with Pfizer. I had to go with Big Pharma. I would have gladly have taken the Marlboro vaccine or whatever. So
you wrote to the AMA about this COVID, and it was, in fact, I wrote this down. I thought it was really, really interesting. You asked the AMA what do you think about Philip Morris funding a COVID vaccine. And this is a quote from the book. They wrote back, in weighing up the risk versus benefits in the current pandemic, the AMA position is that it is not unreasonable to let that research happen at this time and not to oppose it simply because of tobacco company investment, which I thought, made sense, and also, made me realise just how serious this crisis is, that the Australian government, who are, or the AMA is obviously the medical association, but, the AMA and the Australian government are both, they use the word precautionary, very precautionary when it comes to tobacco investment and tobacco existence. That's a pretty remarkable, and it also made me think risk versus benefit, and the whole vaping industry, for example, versus tobacco, risk versus benefit. That whatever risk you may have of a vape, the benefit is there compared to, say, smoking cigarettes. But it was a very, very interesting response. Would you take a Philip? You would put your arm out for Philip Morris?
Oh, yeah, but you've read my book. I'm doing it. I'm putting anything in my mouth that passes by. One of the really good things about how, like, I've just been on TV just doing everything is I'm just not in the situation I can ever like wag my finger or like take the moral high horse on anything. So like if this book was like, guys, now you really should not put any of this stuff in your mouth. Like people are just going to go, hang on, I saw you on TV drinking peyote in the Arizona desert. So yes, John, yeah, we're really going to take some like public health, like, John, you really care about your body. I was thinking that when I watched you getting nailed to a crucifix. Yes, let's listen to the crucifix guy about, health and treating our bodies right. So, yeah, but if this book was about Philip Morris getting into vaping, I wouldn't have a book because, I mean, that's a fair enough question. And even like the dangers of vaping, like that's a fair enough question or whatever. But like the book is really about word games and just like the absolute most jaw-dropping thing of them kind of putting out a cigarette and saying it's not a cigarette and just getting away with it. Probably the best, like to put my case about what I'm getting at with this is that at the end of it, I suddenly realize that because there's all these questions: is it smoke? Is it not smoke? Is it a cigarette or is it not cigarette? Is it tar? Or there's all these things or whatever. And then I was like thinking, I was just going, well, why do people not like cigarettes? It's like, oh, they give you cancer. And I go, well, really, that's the only question really is like, will this give you cancer? And more so the same cancers you'll get if you smoke a Marlboro. And so I got onto one of their science lectures because with COVID, they decided to do some things they usually do in person and just to do it online or whatever. And I was very lucky for the sake of my book because I submitted a question and answer. I just said, the thing people hate about cigarettes is cancer. It gives you cancer. Will this not give me cancer? And the science woman just answered and said, and lots of buffering where it's like, oh well, there's less blah 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 blah, and then she said, ultimately no, we haven't done the research yet to say whether this doesn't give you cancer. And then it becomes like, well, what are we talking about? like that's the point. Like, okay, it's not smoke, it's aerosol, and it gives you the same cancer a Marlboro does. So yeah.
I've got some questions here from people that have been watching tonight, and the first one's from Chris, who's said, I really enjoyed the book. I noticed that during the course of your research, you drank a large quantity of gin.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on big alcohol?
Well, here we go. I've gone to Slivovitz recently.
What's it like?
Slivovitz is really good because I don't actually like the taste of alcohol. I prefer just the feeling. So Slivovitz, you can like just have a little bit, and it's the same as like having like 8 beers or something. So you just get to lie on the floor, knocked out, without feeling all bloated. So that's good. So, I mean, this is why. When I did this book, part of the reason I kept it so focused on this little trickery thing or whatever that they were doing is because, it just kind of goes everywhere as soon as it becomes like, oh, yeah, but McDonald's lies too. And McDonald's says it's got healthy food, but really, it will make you fat or whatever. But but what I was really, I mean, bad news for the world, but good news for my book was that what Philip Morris is doing is so, first of all, unknown up until this, like there's no one else is covering it. And then he's so audacious and so new. It's like, it's beyond anything. It's like, because people can go, oh, McDonald's are lying. They say they've got a healthy meal. But everyone kind of knows bullshit. Oh yeah, great. It's a healthy burger, sure. Like there's some level of that. Whilst this new ruse that Philip Morris have done, like it's so brilliant, it's so beyond anything. So it's like next level chicanery. But obviously there's a problem with alcohol. Like I'm not denying it. So it's not like but yeah, in the book, I do make a bit of a thing. Because I did do things in my book because I didn't want my book to be like me hectoring or whatever. So there are like a few little surprises in the book, some of which haven't come up yet when people talk about it. Like where, like for instance, I thought it was kind of cool in the background, like in my circles of friends or whatever, like there's people who take drugs. And so that's sort of like, just sprinkled throughout the book. Like it's not a big thing or whatever, but like, so for instance, I just have a friend who's at my house and she's brought cocaine,
Mm.
and she just takes it. I don't make a big deal of it in the book. I just like put it in as like another author might put, and she reached for a cup of tea. But I put that stuff in the book to sort of try to build a bit of a picture of the world and addiction, and like how, you know, it's hard to pin down these things. Like at what point, what point is it is like what, like if how many car crashes are equal to the dangers of cigarettes or whatever like that. So yeah, I tried to sort of like create a world in which, and also which I was complicit, where especially in lockdown I was drinking so much. So that's in the book. And I did really try to get addicted to nicotine in some way because I thought it'd be cool for the storyline, but it just wasn't happening.
It felt like you really did give it a go, and I was quite sort of envious, actually, that, you know, like I said at the beginning, you know, from the very first cigarette I ever smoked, I just saw all their charms,
Yeah.
and loved everything about them. Whereas you just keep trying to inhale, or, you know, pick your teeth with nicotine laced toothpicks, and
Yes.
it just, you know, you'll get a little buzz for a while and run around a plane or something, and then that's kind of it. You're very, very lucky. Another question here from Samantha: what does Savas think of the book? And another one connected, dying to know, did Savas forgive you?
Well, first of all, I've still talked to his, like Savas is number 2 at Vaporize. He's a general manager of Vaporize Australia. Okay, so don't, you know, like I just want to, in a bit of a defense of myself, like, and so I'm still in not constant, but I still like communicate with his boss. Like he's number 2 at the company, is number 1 at the company, and I still talk to him. Like before I went on Q&A. This is his boss. I said, oh, listen, I'm going on Q&A, and what's the update on the vaping laws in Australia? So I'm still sort of friends with them and other people at Vaporize, the vaping bogan, I've like, and stuff like that. So Savas, I know from his boss that Savas liked the book, and he provided screenshots of Savas talking about my book to him or whatever. But I haven't actually. Savas hasn't got back to me my last call. So there might be something. There still has to be a bit kind of patched up, I think. But I think I can still patch it up. But I put that all in the book. I did feel bad, but I mean, you've read the book. Whoever the question asker is, like, how could I not put that in the book? For other people wondering, it's like this Savas guy who's really high up at this vaping company imprudently reveals a killer piece of information and about Philip Morris and the vaping industry and a Senate inquiry. And I had to put it in the book. But I just felt bad about it. And like my book goes to so much effort to kind of just focus on Philip Morris and not make a big hoo-ha about, like, for instance, I find out that a particular vaping advocate, Alex Wodak, that he's took some travel expenses from a company that's fully funded by a company that's fully funded by a company that's Philip Morris or whatever, right? But I don't like.
And this is Dr. Alex Wodak,
yes,
one of the most esteemed addiction medicine specialists.
I know, but I don't make a big deal. For instance, I kind of find out how, like, bump into, usually these things I kind of bumped into it, like Fiona Patton, who's she's into drug, what do you call it, decriminalization.
She's the leader of the Reason Party,
and everyone loves her. I love her. I still love her or whatever like that. But like, there was a bit of connective tissue where she does she kind of, and I don't even make out like she knew or whatever like that, where she does an interview with Vice magazine, and it's for a dedicated Vice site that's fully funded by Philip Morris International, where she's, because the quickest way I can say this is Philip Morris, even though they're a competitor to vaping in countries like Australia, they think their strategy is, if we get vaping fully legalized, that's going to soften the path for us being able to come up later with our heat sticks and go, well, you've legalized vaping, so why not this or whatever? So therefore, depending on the country, they can even be endorsing vaping and trying, even though on another level, that's their competitor or whatever. So anyway, but what I'm saying is Fiona Patton didn't mind. She read the book and she liked it. And I'm like going to do a thing with her, like whatever. It's like, it's not my fault if I bump into things where, and I don't like present them in the book like these enormous gotcha moments.
No.
How smaller a deal could I have made the Dr. Alex Wodak thing than I did? Like I actually just goddamn stated
and you then reveal he gets his own sub chapter, which he very much deserves in any serious book about harm reduction from tobacco. He's a pretty important serious human being. One of the things that actually I found really good in the book was that the way this whole issue brings really weird people together. And in fact, you just mentioned like there was a meeting, I don't know if it was for the Senate report but where there was in the same room, Fiona Patton, Dr. Alex Wodak, Tim Wilson, who is the federal member for 16, and former IPA. And why was Tim Wilson there, for example?
So Tim Wilson, generally speaking, is like for vaping, and I think there's just people who are like libertarian. So I don't think like all these people, even if they're like right wing and conservative, like I don't think it's necessarily they're in it for bad reasons or whatever. Like they're just for they're like libertarians, and so they think people should have control over their own bodies and their own lives or whatever. So you have like left-wing people who are like that and right-wing people who are like that. So so you do have like 3CR community radio. You've just got people there who are like, because they're so lefty, they're into drug legalization. And then you've got Philip Morris who are into like, decriminalizing and or fully legalizing vaping. So you just get all these people who on other levels are very different, but on this level they're kind of connected.
Our time, we've got like a minute left, and I'm sorry I didn't get to a few more questions, but I do want to ask you the last one about just about how you think this might end for Philip Morris.
I think they just win. They've already won in America. Yeah, like the whole thing of like, are they against vapes or for vapes, and how that benefits is just really complicated, and it's also country specific. So at the moment, there's talk about vaping not being legalized or being banned or having heavy prohibition and restrictions, or not prohibition, restrictions on it in America. And in some ways, that's going to be good for Philip Morris, because while that has been happening, the IQOS and the heat stick have been permitted by their federal drug administration. So it's like, it is like, it's such a tangle. Like at the moment, like a few people, because my book came out, they sent me these articles, they're like sending me links to this article going, oh, it looks like the federal drug administration is going to really crack down on vaping in America. And with the implication that that's bad for Philip Morris, when really in this other way, it's not bad for them, because it's like they've already been permitted by the federal drug administration. So it's like they're putting the door to the castle up. And then it just becomes really messy, because Philip Morris are invested in things like Juul. So, but I still don't reckon that's their main game. I think their main game is tobacco with this flagship product. And they're sort of like, having their fingers in vaping pies is just more like a bit of a side issue to them, just because they're like a huge behemoth that have their fingers in everything. Blah.
It's like the coronavirus, they're going to find the weakest link of everywhere. There's no culture they can't adapt to.
They've got into Ventolin. That's also happened after my book came out. Morris are getting into asthma inhalers. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
John, we have to finish up. Our time is up, but I could keep talking to you for many hours more.
Thank you very much, Sally.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, viewers.
And thank you very much to Plus61J Media for hosting John Safran and me tonight. And thank you for all of you who are out there, wherever you are. Take care and see you.